Hi guys, welcome to my shop. I'm Robin. Today's a special day. I received a item in the mail from Tom Lipton, Ox Tools. Nice Ox Tools mouse pad and Ox Tools shirt. But the real item of interest is the level base from episode 49, Meatloaf episode 49, that Tom did, showing this level that he got and his plans on restoring it. So Tom is the one who has actually inspired me to get off my duff and start doing some videos. I've been machining for 51 years. Been machining since I was 12, 51 years. And also love to scrape. Foundations of Mechanical Accuracy by Moore. That book inspired me way back to just take up scraping, and it's been very helpful in my machining career. So I was thinking of something to show Tom some appreciation for his inspiration to me, and thought, hey, I remember that level. I just recently went through catching up on all the videos that Tom's done, not every single one, but a lot of them. And episode 49, Meatloaf, was this level. So I thought, hey, I'll send him some pictures of my scraping, and so he knows I'm not some nutcase, and see if he'd like to do a collaboration where I'd scrape the base of his level for him as a appreciation item. So Tom said sure, and here it is. And he also sent me an electronic level that I'm going to try to repair. That'll be another episode. So the problem with this, which we both agree on the fix of, is that this thing, like Tom said, had rusted fast to the felt or whatever was in the bottom of the box. And you can see Tom did a nice job of basically starting to scrape this, and it had a pretty nice bearing. But you've got this actual relatively deep rust and pock marks and things. So we're just going to throw this thing on the surface grinder and grind this down until we get rid of this rusted layer within reason. And then we'll flake this thing, not flake, but scrape this to get it perfectly flat. I'm going to be grinding the sides of this because they're also pockmarked. So I'm going to first fill the engraving on this, is actually engraving and has some depth. So technique I like to use there is to I will grit blast just in those valleys to get a good bite. I'll mix up some carbon black and epoxy, put it in there, and then when I surface grind the sides, these will be filled with black, and they'll stand out real nice, and they'll be real permanent. So let's dive in and start on surface grinding this. So I'm going to mask off the area here that I want to, just probably going to throw in the glass beater and hit just the engraving. So we're going to put this on like this, and we will cut this off so that we're just exposing the area where the engraving is. And I don't want to cut into the, I don't want to put scratches in there, so I'm going to lift this up and basically come around and slit this off sideways so I don't leave any scratches in the. Be real tempting to just dive down into the I think I got deep enough there. There we go. I don't want to blast off any of the baked on wrinkle paint that's on this, on the casting part. There we go. So I can throw that in the glass bead cabinet now without fear of blasting off the wrinkle finish on there. There we are with the glass bead. Did a nice job of cleaning out those engravings. So I'm going to take some JB Weld Quick. We don't need much, just enough to mix up with the carbon black to fill in these graduations, or engravings. First I'll mix these two real well. Now I'll throw in some carbon black. Get this nice and jet black color. This gets pretty tight. Excuse me. MEK can be used to thin epoxies temporarily. It's not good to use a ton of it. You can ruin the properties of an epoxy by using too much MEK, but yeah, pretty well known reducer for when you need to thin epoxies, like for floor coatings and things like that, where they're a little runnier consistency would help. Okay, that's pretty nice consistency. Clean off my spatula before that turns to a rock. Alright. Now we'll just squeegee this in. Really need to work this stuff in real hard. It's easy to get air pockets in engravings where you really want to work this multiple directions. And then it does have a tendency to shrink back, so it's always good to put like just a glazed layer over top that's high. The thinned consistency also helps the epoxy wet to the material better. If it's real doughy and dry, sometimes it doesn't actually get a good wet to the surface. Just making sure that I've got even though it looks like that line there is not from the spatula, that was on that on that paint beforehand. I noticed it when I taped the to mask off for the just makes sense to do this now since I'm going to surface grind. The top and bottom are the same width, so when I go to surface grind this thing, just for my convenience, it's going to pay to make this thing the same width on here. I'm not going to be taking much off the sides. I'm not worried about getting that pristine, but it's not just enough to work with. So that that'll cure, and I can work on the rest of it while that's curing, and clean off our slide here. And of course MEK will definitely make this easy. Mirror's a pretty handy mixing tool, glass surface, and I just keep that around for mixing epoxies. Non-absorbent, which is important. I'm going to warm this up a little bit. I just thought after I put that on there, another thing that can well, speed the cure and also make the epoxies more fluid is to warm the part or the epoxy. So I'll just warm this up enough to possibly get the epoxy to cure a little quicker, because JB Quick is still like a 4-hour cure. So don't want to get this too hot. You can ruin epoxies by overheating them, but a gentle warming is not a big deal. Yeah, I've stoned the bottom of my or the level and the chuck. I put this on. I've just got my magnet turned on just enough to have a little residual, because this free has a little pivot, a little high in the center. So I don't want to influence this side. So I'm just getting enough there that I'm tweaking my chuck so I'm not holding it too tight. Yeah, basically sitting on there with residual magnetism. Okay, we've kissed those tops parallel to the bottom, so when we flip this we can sit on those. And now I want to hit the sides, but first I'm going to lay this on my cast iron surface plate that has a piece of 220 silicon carbide wet or dry paper glued on with 3M77 spray, and I'm going to use that to just gently basically stone this so that when we sit we're not twisting the frame. Not that these sides actually matter, but you can see the we're bearing here, here, and here. So this actually has a twist in it. This has warped some from its original condition. So I'm just going to rub this some more till I get a little more bearing here, so I'm not warping this, or racking this thing when I'm This paper's pretty worn. This is a very handy piece of apparatus to have in the shop. This gets used a lot. Okay, that's more than I'm going to sand out, but we know we've got good uniform bearing. So I'll do the same thing. I'll use real light magnet pressure or magnet attraction. That's starting to come across a little bit. Let's see what this looks like here. It's just a gentle rub sideways. You can see what's going on. Well, I'm hitting here, here, and here, so I'm just going to grind the rest. Starting the chuck here. These are precision ground flat stones. It's been diamond ground to be dead flat in matched pairs. Professional Instrument sells these. Are like $400 and some, but obviously I didn't pay $400. I made my own. I'll probably do a video on that, on stoning in general. See a lot of guys using stones that just make me cringe. I learned this technique and the process from Professional Instruments. Makes probably the finest air bearing spindles in the world. They taught me a lot, so I'll cover these in another video. This is only a 12-inch grinder, but I could squeak 15 inches out of it, which is what I'm going to check now for my actual travels. Okay. And I'm turning this on partially. That's got more than enough grip. It's one thing to keep in mind, guys, you don't always have to turn your magnetic chuck. Just because it's a magnetic chuck does not mean you can't use controlled amounts of gripping. A lot of times just turning the chuck on and turning it off and just let the residual that's in the piece, sometimes is enough, but sometimes you need to leave just a little bit on. And so just a tip. So what I'm seeing here is that just as we saw when we were stoning it, it looks like the edge of the base is not parallel to the upper section. And the problem that's going to be there is if I keep going where I am there, I noticed I just cleaned up the epoxy off there. I'm going to end up having a situation where as I go down I'm liable to lose the depth of engraving on this side. So I'm going to back up and regroup. I'm going to grab this thing in a vise and level that section so it's flat, and then grind the base edge, because the width is irrelevant, base edge parallel to it first. So I'm going to set up for that right now. Yeah. Okay, here I have it set up in my grinding vise. I have a parallel under the other side that's sitting on the mate to this on the opposite side, so that I have enough room over the top to be able to grind. I have a pin in the back so that I'm actually squaring on the surface there. Something this aspect ratio of height to width of this gripping has a tendency to grip and not actually rest perfectly, so it's always good to use a roller, a pin, whatever, in the back to allow that to roll up and actually mate to that reference face. And we're going to zoom in here and we're going to take a look at what I'm doing here with the indicator. And right here I'm zeroed on the surface there that's clean. There's no rust on it. Here I'm clean, no rust. Now I want to notice here at the end there's a little patch where it's been glass beaded. But watch what happens when I come up on the rust where it wasn't there. So it's almost 0.003 of rust. Now I'm going to come over and look and see what the edge looks like here. And I'm pretty much all at one end. I'll just re-zero this, and then we'll take a look here and we'll see that. See, that's got quite a bit. That's what we were seeing. So that could have been, I don't know if that was scraped or whatever, but we're going to square that up because that edge alignment's irrelevant. We're going to square that up, clean that edge up. Then once we've got this done, then we can flip it, put it on the chuck. Whatever, we're not really concerned about distortion in this. This flatness in this direction isn't really a functional aspect of the level. I thought I was going to be able to get away with using my regular aluminum oxide wheel that I use for general soft material grinding, but and it does remove material, but it doesn't cut crisp and clean. So I put my silicon carbide wheel on that I use for cast iron grinding. If I'm doing a lot of actual gray iron grinding, ductile iron works pretty well using the regular wheel, but gray iron just likes silicon carbide wheel. It just cuts freer, crisper, and for this we want a decent cutting action, especially when we do the flat, that we're not pushing and we get a good grind. One of the things I did when I did the grind with the silicon carbide wheel is I kissed here, and then there was a significant amount to remove here, about 12.5 thousandths. So I made that an exact shim stock size. So I went to 15, the step between here and here, so that when I flip this, which we're doing next, I'll be able to easily set that up. Nothing with Tom involved would be complete without some filing. So break this razor edge here that's from our grind. It's going to get removed again when we do the other, and then this edge here. Not that it matters much for what we're doing right here, but it's a good opportunity to talk about area points and vessel points and minimum sag points. Vessel points and the minimum sag points are very close to each other. They're only you got to go to the third decimal place before they're different. So, point 559 distance, 0.559 times the length of the item, spacing between the supports, obviously symmetrical, is the vessel points. That gives you the deflection from gravity will be such that the deflection here and the deflection here and the deflection here will be the same. Area points are different in that they're designed to make the ends be vertical, or the slope, if you want to think of it as a beam, slope would be 0 at each end. So if you're doing something where you're actually lapping an end standard, where the ends you're concerned about parallelism, you would actually need them to be supported. And a lot of end standards actually have their support rings are designed at those locations where they'd be at the area points. None of it matters in what we're doing right now, but interesting to bring up. Some people might not be aware of those two metrological items. So now I'm set up. I got my 15,000 shims. I thought ahead and said, okay, make them even instead of me having to fuss around and try to get something exact. I got the shims are exactly there. So I'm just going to dress this and then grind this till we get rid of the rust. I'm going to plunge grind this where I just take full wheel width and just drop down until I clean up, move over wheel width, drop down. On the silicon carbide wheel, this is a relatively fine wheel, and using the type of grind where you take a deep cut and let the edge break down and form a ramp doesn't work quite as well with this particular wheel. So that's why I'm going to plunge first to get rid of the worst of the material. Alright, we've got a surface ground finish. It's not beautiful, but it's plenty good enough for scraping start. And we got all our rust out. And then we've got casting porosity. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go under the microscope and pick them open a little bit. And then I'm going to take some Harris Stay Bright silver solder, low temp silver solder, and I'm going to flux that up and get that to wet in all those areas such that this is sealed up and isn't a place for dirt and crud to get in, and also a place for rust or whatever to work its way out. So that's what I'm going to do next. There it is after I glass beaded it out. Now I'm going to put some Stay Bright flux in there, and we'll warm this up with the hot air gun, and then take the old Weller gun and flow some solder in there. Using the hot air gun here because you don't want to overheat this at all, and it only takes about 500 degrees for the solder to melt. The hard part here is to get the solder to actually wet down in those holes. It's very easy to just bridge over an air pocket in the holes and go and machine it off, and the holes are still there. So probably took about 15 minutes of fooling around here to try to get that to wet down in the holes. That's why you see me playing around with the soldering iron, pushing things around. I've probably fluxed it 4 or 5 times. Here's our mess after shaving off the solder. So now I'm going to go over on the grinder and dust that again. I'll just throw a couple chamfers on here with the chamfer meister and go from there. There's the patch. Once we actually scrape that, won't be quite as noticeable because of the difference in patterns of the scraping. But yeah, so that pretty generally happy with the way that turned out. I'm using my Brownish Sharp 1021 electronic indicator here. When you're doing this kind of work, electronic indicators are just very nice. But there's some details about working with electronic indicators when you get down into the lower resolutions that might not be apparent. So I'm just going to cover a few of those. Right now I'm on plus or minus 3/10,000ths of an inch. So 0 to 3 is 3/10. Each small division is 10 millionths. That's just kind of my favorite range for when you're typically working in tenths with a regular indicator. Because electronic indicators are so sensitive, you have to realize that there's things like just the cable drag will affect the reading. You can see what I'm doing here. I can almost pull this thing full scale if I want to with the cable. So you never leave your cable in this condition, and many instruments that are meant to have an electronic indicator will have little cable clamps. So I have these Velcro straps that I use. These are off-the-shelf Velcro straps, and you need to cinch your cables down to a fixed condition so that you don't have any play in what the cables can do. So I'm putting one top and bottom here to get that cable to behave. I do have a big stand indicator that it does have the cable clamps and everything, but for this quick check, the big comparator stand type indicator mounts are a little clunky for what I'm doing here. So one advantage of the way that this frame is configured, and the fact that we have this parallel, is that we can check our flatness, straightness, and everything with this method. We don't have to rely purely on bluing and what kind of actual bluing pattern we get on the scraping. We can actually check with a scraper block and an indicator and check this thing for straightness to a much higher level than is typically done with scraping. So now you'll see that we've eliminated our cable pull. I can do, you can still see a little influence there if I get crazy with it, but basically you're talking sub 10 millionths there. So obviously if I was working at a lower scale, if I went to 1 millionth per division, all of a sudden you see, uh-oh, that does matter. Another thing with anytime you have indicators and you're measuring this range, you have hysteresis in all the joints, things just tension in where things are screwed. So it's always good to tap out your fixture, just gentle tapping, to get rid of any of that, so that when you are moving or you have any vibrations, they don't do that. And the beauty of electronic indicator is the ability to electronically zero it without touching anything. So that's really nice. One of the things I love about this indicator is that these adjustment pots are a high-low pot. So when you go a certain distance in fine, and then you hit coarse, where you can go a long way, and then you can come back with your fine. This is a one indicator I just got off of eBay. I actually paid, like with shipping, I think about 64 bucks for this. Just the electronic head. Needed cleaned up a little bit, and needed a little, it actually functioned, but it needed a little electronic cleanup inside and a new battery pack. These things used to come with rechargeable NiCad batteries, and I just put a standard pack of AA cells in there, a standard clip pack, and put them in there, and they work wonderful. So we ground a 15-inch long piece on a 12-inch grinder, which basically is bad practice. You don't expect the end of travels past the specified length of the grinder to give you good results. But we'll see what this Harrig does. I've re-scraped this Harrig maybe about a year ago. I had a little lubrication issue and had a very light seize on the way, and so I basically just re-scraped the whole thing. So I've never actually done any real good straightness checks to see what it's like. I knew from my scraping that it was halfway decent, but this will be a good test to see what it looks like.
I have a reference rail in the back here. Whenever you have something like this to indicate, sometimes if it has a good stance like this where you're not getting any influence, I have these stones such that I know my high points are out here. I've basically stoned heavy here and light at the end, so I don't have any teeter on this. So I can slide this against that rail, and that gives you a nice straight line so that we're not seeing changes in reading that are from the indicator being in different elevations this way, because it does have some shape this direction. So by using this, I can slide along and just stay against the rail, and we'll see what we're doing here. We're on the top scale. 0 to 1 is 1/10. Each small division is 10 millionths. So we're sliding along there, and I'm just using my Delrin stick here to not warm up my part and hold myself against the rail. I would call that pretty good. I'm happy with that. That's definitely sub 50 millionths straightness on the part that's 15 inches long. Trying to just keep this against the rail and slide back. You never trust a single pass to tell you what's going on. You always do multiples. So we'll come back here and see what this does. I'd call that good. Now, in theory, scraping this is a total waste of time, because that's more than flat for this level. It's only a 5/10 per 10-inch level. So that's way overkill. But the whole purpose of this was to have the base scraped. So we'll still scrape it. But because I know now that geometrically I don't really have to do anything to this thing as far as scraping for flatness, which is a good thing. Scraping just for the sake of scraping isn't my cup of tea. When it's the only way you have, or you need to get bearing or oil pockets or whatever, good deal. But if you've got a grinder and you can grind it to what you need, great. So I will be able to just basically flake this, and with a very fine flake, just to get some bearing points, and we'll look at it with bluing. But yeah, basically this is just going to get flaked because the geometry of it is really good. We can check sideways here and see what we get, and if we go across here, we'll look and we see that that's probably got a 30 millionths, 30 or 40 millionths high in the center. Okay, so that can come out when we scrape. So I'm real happy with that, and we'll carry on and go start scraping. One last thing on a little electronic indicator fun here is at 1 millionth per division, this basically is sitting on these two pads, well, 4 pads actually, but looking at 2D version, this is 2 feet here, and this is unsupported out here. So if I warm this section here, this beam is going to curve this way from the expansion of the upper layer, and it's going to droop. So this is going to droop down, pivoting around this point. So just to show you how sensitive this, I'm just going to breathe on this center section and watch the indicator droop as I breathe on this. There's 5 millionths right there. Now watch it creep back. It's down to 3 millionths. It's coming back, because remember, we're only that very, very mild warming is just warming the skin of that iron. There's not a lot of mass there compared to the thermal capacity of my breath. So yep, it's creeping right back. Then we can do the opposite. We put a little alcohol on here, get a little evaporative cooling going. And we'll go the opposite way. And you can see that's pretty substantial too. That's cooling that down, shrinking the top, curling this thing back up this direction. And if I wipe my alcohol off, I'll come back down the other direction. So just to show you how sensitive things are when you get down to that level, that's why you see plastic heat shields and things on gauge block comparator stations and things. Just the radiant heat of your body is going to affect things at these levels. Forgot to mention the plate I'm using. It's a Starrett Master Pink Laboratory plate. It's extra thick for the laboratory rating to keep the deflection, the accuracy with the deflection under weight within the spec for a laboratory grade. Here's a scraper I'm going to use on this. This is a little detail scraper that I made. This is ground out of a file. This has a carbide blade, and the carbide has a bevel on it, very shallow angle here. You look where the edge is on this face compared to this face, you can see there's a very shallow angle. It basically gives a larger bond area for the silver solder. And then the faces are lapped with 1 micron on the ceramic lap. And then I also lap the cutting edge. So it holds up real well and has a nice crisp cut and is nice and narrow for the basically mini scraping that I'm doing on this piece. Always pays to warm up on a scrap piece and kind of get your rhythm back. This is kind of a muscle memory kind of thing, and I use the more quarter moon style of scrape, regardless of whether I'm flaking or scraping. So just because it's quarter moon here, don't think that it's just flaking. In essence, I am flaking this because the geometry is so good that all we're doing is breaking up the surface on the level and doing any minor tweaks in topography that we need to do. But this is just a sample piece here. It's very difficult to photo or video scrape and get a good picture of what's going on. But yeah, this is the pattern, the style that I'm going to be putting on there. Basically, flaking in one direction, quarter moon pattern one way, and flaking the other way. Which would be no different than my actual scraping. But like I said, I don't have to change the topography of this of any significance since it's so stinking flat already.
Here you see the quarter moon pattern. The object is to have the wide point of each successive scrape cover up the tails of the previous row. The other aspect of this is, since the start and stop points are basically very small lines, and with the technique I'm using here, I'm actually almost lifting off right at the tail. There's almost no burr. When you go to stone this, you're not actually stoning burrs like the kind of burrs you get from a biax or even any kind of straight line scraping, where you just plow and stop dead and leave a big furrow. That's the real beauty of that style of scraping. Here you see we're just marching our way along in the this is at 2 times speed here, and that just trying to keep an even pattern and be very uniform. This is the first direction. We're going at roughly 45 degrees to the angle of the piece. Then we'll flip and we'll go 90 degrees to this in another direction, exact same thing. And obviously with the quarter moon, you always are working from left to right, assuming you do your moons in this direction, such that the fat part of the moon covers the other. Here you see we're getting to the end, and here you'll see where the we're not just going through the motions here. We're actually looking for where the fattest part of the scrape hits, and we're trying to get that to be where we want it. Right now I'm just doing a general pattern, and you'll see as I come up to the corners here, I'm going to come back, and here we're getting to those nasty little edges where it's really tough to hit, but you got to hit them, or they'll just be too big of a pad. Now I'm going to come back, and I'm looking for the places where I didn't get an even bearing. You'll see the darker, bigger blotches of blue. I'm coming back and I'm hitting them and cutting them in half. And if you don't have reasonable accuracy in where you're hitting, you'll just end up making holes. So your accuracy of where that hits is pretty important. Not implying that I'm hitting them dead nuts, but you got to be in the ballpark. Otherwise, if you're in another gully, you're just making the gully deeper. And you can see here I'm hitting all these spots to get the overall density of blue relatively even. Everywhere where I see it being too thick, I come back and just hit it and get it more uniform. Now we're going the other direction, 90 degrees to the first pattern. Same thing, we're moving from left to right. The lighting isn't perfect for you being able to see what's going on here in the video, but basically the same thing, quarter moon pattern, and I'm just trying to also, in this particular case, hit the blue spots, cut them in half again, and have the fat part of the moon go right through those darker spots. So in this case, I'm not, even though I'm in sort of doing a general pattern, I am actually hitting, I'm actually trying to split those spots to get the pattern to be more even. Here's after the second pass at 90 degrees. Just trying to get an even bearing. Bearing in this case meaning the amount of peaks that are still left from the original grind. Now with stone, with our ground flat stones, but since this stone is precisely ground flat on with a diamond wheel, this doesn't disturb geometry, doesn't dig holes, it just burnishes the tops very nicely and leaves basically a mirror finish on your plateaus. The quarter moon style of scraping leaves very little burr. So this, what you can see, I don't know if you can see here, that this leaves a really shiny finish here. You can see the scrape marks in there. Like I said, I apologize. It's really difficult to get a good picture of scraping. So I'm going to go check this on the plate, see what it looks like. So now we're back on the surface plate. We have our guide rail back here, and we're zeroed here. We're running down the center. Remember, we're on 10 millionths per division on the top scale. 0 to 1 is 1/10. I like it. Using the Delrin pusher here so my body heat doesn't mess with this thing. That's pretty darn nice. I'm going to go back to the back edge here. I'm sure it's not. I'm sure there's some whoop-de-doo somewhere in this thing.
That's lovely. Now, I think on this edge we've got some roll off here on this. Yeah. That's like 50 millionths low there on the corner. Of course, you're seeing undulations from the scraping height, which is very shallow on purpose. I call that a winner. So, my apologies that this wasn't more of a scraping demonstration in the sense of actually adjusting geometry and everything. It's just because the grinder did such a nice job of making the thing geometrically really, really nice. And all we did was flake to break up the surface into pockets. I'm not even going to bother bluing it. I'll give you some views of this in the light. You'll see that there's just polished plateaus. I hope Tom's happy with it. The patch there is somewhat unfortunate, but I guess unavoidable. That would have been lurking right under the surface. We wouldn't have got all the rust out if we hadn't have gone that far, but at least it's sealed now, so that nothing's going to come out of there and cause issues as far as cleaning and whatever. So here it is, Tom, ready to come back at you. Well, everything's ready for you, and I am happy to have been able to do something useful for you as an appreciation project, and hope it lives up to your expectations.